Hello and welcome to Miniature Adventures. I'm Big Lee, and this week I want to tackle some of the biggest myths about historical wargaming. So this week I wanted to get on my soapbox and turn my attention to historical wargaming to face down a few misconceptions that seem to come up time and time again. It's a niche of nobbin of wargaming, of course, where history meets creativity, tactics meet storytelling, and where tiny soldiers wage epic battles across tabletops. But despite its richness, historical wargaming is surrounded by all sorts of misconceptions and stereotypes that just don't seem to want to go away. So today I wanted to set the record straight and bust some myths to show that the hobby is really about. And at the end I will of course ask what historical wargaming myths have you encountered and how would you respond to them? So myth one, it's just for old men, and I'm not oblivious to the fact that you've got an old fart here making the defence, but let's kick off with this. There's this idea that historical wargaming is a dusty pastime for retirees, old men with magnifying glasses and an encyclopedic knowledge of Prussian uniforms, but that of course is not the reality. The wargaming today is more diverse than ever. Younger players, families, women, folks from all walks of life are getting involved, thanks in large part to online communities, modern rulebooks, and the incredible content being shared on social media. Attend any wargaming convention like Salute, for instance, and you will soon be disabused of the idea that historical wargamers only come in to eat with grey beards, pointing at their units with the end of their pipe. So no, it's not just an old man's game, it's a living, growing hobby, thankfully, that welcomes anyone with a passion for history and a love of gaming. Myth 2, you have to be a history expert. Well, that's a myth that you need to be some kind of history academic to even touch a historical army, and that of course is simply not true. Sure, some players are walking encyclopedias, and that's absolutely awesome, but for most of us, the learning comes through the hobby. You start by painting a Roman legion, and the next thing you know you're down a rabbit hole of Punic wars and Gaelic tribes. You don't need a degree, just insatiable curiosity and maybe a browser tab open for very quick research. Myth 3, it's only Napoleonic and World War II. Now of course these are the two biggest groupings of historical wargamers, but if you think that that's what historical wargaming is, it's just limited to those two eras, then you'd be wrong. The truth is that this hobby covers thousands of years of human conflict. Want to fight Viking raids? You can. Ancient chariot warfare? Covered. Pike and shot? Absolutely. Even Vietnam, Korea and the Cold War gone hot. There's a game for that. Again, walk around any wargaming convention, you will likely see multiple periods of history being played, and often periods that even experienced wargamers didn't know existed. Historical wargaming is as wide-ranging as history itself, and humans have been fighting each other ever since that pesky monolith turned up. Myth 4, it's slow and boring. There's a stereotype that historical games are long, slow and bogged down by charts and tables and obscure rules. But modern historical games aren't like that. They're fast, they're cinematic, they're packed with narrative and tension. Games like Bolt Action, Infamy and Blood and Plunder, they deliver exciting battles that play out in as little as under 2 hours. The hobby has evolved and it's more accessible and more fun than ever. Of course there are longer running games, those old fashioned style games, and if that's your bag then more power to your elbow, because there's room in this historical wargaming for every type of gamer. Myth 5, there is no community. Now I get that there are certain groups of wargamers playing other types of games, shall we say, where they've got a very strong community feel. Well, you think that doesn't exist in historical wargaming? Think again. Across the world, clubs are thriving, conventions are full, online communities on Discord, Facebook, Reddit, they're buzzing with activity. Publishers like Wargames, Perry Miniatures, Victrix, Gripping Beast are producing new kits and rules all the time. The community is alive and well, and it's waiting to welcome you. Myth 6, it's too expensive. Some people think historical wargaming is expensive, but in reality it can be one of the most budget-friendly ways to start tabletop gaming. Plastic kits are an affordable alternative to metal miniatures, many rulebooks are one-time purchases, and some are even free. And you don't need to keep up to date with the constant codex updates like in some other games that I won't mention. And if you play in smaller scales, the cost drops even further. With smart choices, you can build a full army for under 100 quid. And if you choose 6mm or 2mm, you can probably do the opposing side as well. Myth 7. It's too serious. Another common myth is that historical gamers are humorless sticklers for accuracy. Well, I can honestly say that I've never yet met a historical wargamer who isn't brimming with enthusiasm, good humour and personality. Yes, there's a respect for history, but there's also room for fun, for creativity and for plenty of tableside banter. Misfiring cannons, heroic last stands, cavalry charges gone wrong. It's dynamic, exciting and sometimes downright hilarious. Myth 8. It's not visually impressive. This is one myth that I truly do not understand. Some folks think historical games look dull. No monsters, no lasers, no over-the-top fantasy. But let me tell you, when you see a full Napoleonic battlefield or a Roman legion advancing across the hand-built table, it is breathtaking. The terrain, the uniforms, the scale, it's just as cinematic as any fantasy game, just rooted in real-world drama. Again, have a look at the winners from the recent Salute show and you will realise that historical wargames tables are just as impressive and visually stimulating as any other game. Now, myth 9, there's no room for creativity. Well, hopefully we've already put that one to bed, but let's address it anyway. You know, there is a myth that historical wargaming is rigid, that there's no room for imagination. But in reality, creativity is absolutely everywhere within this niche of the hobby. From alternative history campaigns to stylised painting, kit bashing, terrain building, scenario design, there's as much room for expression here as in any fantasy or sci-fi game. History may set the stage, but you tell the story. That's yours to create. So there you have it, some of the biggest myths that I've encountered about historical wargaming, hopefully debunked. And this hobby isn't old-fashioned, it isn't elitist, and it's definitely not boring. Instead, historical wargames are dynamic, creative and welcoming, and it's one of the most rewarding ways to combine strategy, craftsmanship and a love of the past. Whether you're curious about Caesar's campaigns or the D-Day landings or something somewhere in between, there's a place for you in this world. So grab a brush, roll some dice and start your journey. There are literally thousands of years of human history just waiting to be explored. So as usual, I want to throw this one out to you and ask, have you come across any myths about historical wargaming that I haven't listed here? And if you have, can you debunk them? Or do you agree with them? As always, I would love to hear what you think in the comments below. So I have time for a Workbench update, and I have finally finished another Oppochini unit for the 1812 Retreat from Moscow project that Ray and I have been steadily working through. So let me introduce a grim and determined band of Moscow Oppochini, citizen soldiers armed with pikes, trudging through the snow to defend our homeland. This unit really captures the ragged determination of Russia's last-ditch defence during the 1812 campaign. These militia were not professional troops, they were volunteers and conscripts, so they were tradesmen, peasants, townsfolk, hastily organised to bolster the Russian resistance as Napoleon's Grand Army advanced on Moscow. Now, what makes this unit stand out visually is their distinctive brown caftan style uniforms. Now, these long belted coats were practical for the Russian winter, and many were lined or trimmed with fur, which I tried to reflect in some of the models. The uniform was often accompanied by tall fur hats, giving the figures a consistent and iconic silhouette. I've kept the palette earthy and subdued, lots of rich browns and muted reds for the sashes and dark fur tones. It's a look that screams militia, but it also carries a real sense of rugged utility. The basework ties it all together, snow effects and tufts poking through the frozen ground, along with a scenic backdrop that places them firmly in the brutal Russian winter. Now, their weapons are just as evocative, basically long wooden sticks tipped with an iron or even repurposed bayonets. While pikes were largely obsolete by 1812, they still had their uses for militias. Cheap and easy to produce, they allowed these citizen soldiers to form a semblance of defence especially against cavalry or to harass stragglers during the retreat. Now, I've painted these pikes to look weather worn and practical rather than polished. These were tools of desperation and not parade ground arms after all. Now the Moscow Oppochini were intended to support the Russian army in a more sort of defensive auxiliary capacity, manning garrisons, guarding supply lines and reinforcing the flanks when needed, freeing up other troops for frontline activity. However, during the chaos of the French retreat from Moscow, even troops like these found themselves swept up in the wider conflict. They were often deployed alongside Cossack raiders or local partisans, harassing the retreating French, capturing isolated units and cutting off supply routes. Now they may be militia and therefore largely untrained, but they were their morale was bolstered by fierce patriotism and the presence of religious icons, which I've echoed in the unit's banner, featuring a traditional Orthodox image. This is one of the most striking elements of the Moscow Oppochini units, is their religious banners that they carry. A vivid reminder of how deeply entwined faith and patriotism were in the Russian resistance during 1812. For many Oppochini units, especially those raised in and around Moscow, banners were not standard military flags. Instead, they were often deeply personal and spiritual symbols featuring Orthodox Christian icons and saints, like the Virgin Mary. These images weren't just decorative, they were believed to provide divine protection and moral guidance, especially for the irregular troops who lacked the discipline and structure of the regular army. In the case of the Moscow Oppochini, many units carried banners bearing the image of St. Nicholas, Our Lady of Kazan or Christ Pantocrator, all revered figures in Russian Orthodoxy. In practice, these banners are often made by local communities or churches, sometimes even embroidered by hand, and then blessed before being carried into the field. These gave them deep emotional resonance for the men under them. They weren't just fighting for the Tsar and for their country, but for their families, faith and the sanctity of their homeland. Now this unit was a joy to work on, a little different from the polished parade uniforms of the infantry that I've painted so far, but full of character and lots of narrative. So that's it for this week. As always, I'd love to hear from you in the conversation in the comments below. And if you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe and share. And of course, if you want to keep up to with weekly content from this channel, please tap the bell notification icon. So until next week, stay safe, keep gaming, and of course, keep rolling high.